Yo, what's up guys, Getalle here and welcome to this RSI Masterclass. Today I want to talk about the Woodsbot RSI indicator that we provide. I want to go over what is RSI, what does it do, what is overbought, what is oversold, the best way to utilize RSI, what are RSI divergences, and some nuances like the 50 mark, resistance and support, and how you can even use trend lines with the RSI indicator. Okay, let's begin. So what even is RSI? RSI stands for Relative Strength Index. And basically the name says it all. It measures the relative strength of price action. It also measures the speed and momentum. So RSI is a momentum oscillator. What does this mean? An oscillator in trading always oscillates between the numbers 100 right here and 0 right here. So it will always oscillate between these numbers. And as you can see right here, ignore the green lines, but as you can see, the RSI is oscillating at the moment as well. That's the basic definition of what a RSI is. Now, there's lots of ways to utilize and use the RSI indicator. It's a very special indicator to me because it's part of my main trading strategy and a core component of how I make money and how I'm actually be profitable. First thing is RSI basically mimics price action, and we can see this right here. So we are on the monthly time frame on Bitcoin, and we can see how the RSI is basically mimicking the price action, right? So first, we can see that the RSI basically mimics price action. We can see on the RSI indicator that the RSI is trending on the indicator, right? It's making higher highs and higher lows. The same way price action is making higher highs and higher lows, right? Then we can see price action is going down and the RSI is going down as well. We can see we have a high right here, and we can see we also have a high right here on the RSI indicator. So basically RSI follows price action. So how can we actually utilize this indicator if all it does is basically mimicking price action? That's a good question. And one thing to utilize the RSI indicator is RSI divergences. RSI divergence is, in my opinion, the best way to utilize the RSI indicator. Now I have this cheat sheet right here, what RSI divergence is. So again, with the definition at the beginning, RSI measures relative strength. That means that if price is strong, for example, if price action is trending up, the RSI indicator should also be trending up. However, if the RSI indicator is trending down, but price action is trending up, there's a divergence, right? There's a divergence between the indicator and the price action. Because the RSI indicator measures relative strength, if the RSI indicator is going down, but price action is going up, this tells us that the price action that is going up is not as strong as the price action before. So the RSI indicator tells us that even though price action is going up, we can see that price action is actually becoming weaker and weaker. It might sound strange, but we're gonna see. I'm gonna show you guys some examples later on. But basically, this is what a RSI divergence is. You can see right here on this cheat sheet, right? You can see when price action is, for example, going down, right here, but the RSI indicator is going up, right? So price action is making lower lows, but the RSI indicator is making higher lows. This is what we call a bullish divergence. This is really important to know. And we can see the opposite here as well, right? Price action is going up, it's making higher highs, but the RSI indicator is making lower highs. So what I was talking about earlier. And this is called a bearish divergence. Also really important. And these divergences tells us the relative strength, right? So on the bearish divergence, price action is going up, but the momentum oscillator, the RSI indicator, is going down. This tells us the price action, even though it's going up, it's becoming weaker and weaker. And the same thing for the bullish divergence, right? Price action is going down, but the momentum oscillator is going up. And this tells us, okay, price action is actually becoming stronger, even though price action is going lower, right? So the indicator tells us when there is relative strength and relative weakness in a market, which you can't see otherwise. You wouldn't be able to see the relative strength or the relative weakness in price action because price action is going up, so it must mean it's strong, right? No, the RSI tells us otherwise. And these kinds of divergences, we can utilize. Now, what I want to show you guys is a couple of examples. I'm on the weekly time frame right here, right? On Bitcoin. And I'm going to go into the replay tool. And all that we can see is basically bullish price action, right? Price action is making higher highs and higher lows, right? It's in a good strong uptrend, right? This is what we can see just by watching price action. So there's no reason for price action to stop trending, right? But here comes the RSI indicator in place. Because if we look at the RSI, we can actually see, wait, price action is going up, but the indicator is going down. You can see this right here, right? We have price action making a higher high. The RSI is also making a higher high. But then price action makes another higher high, but the RSI indicator is making a lower high. And then for the third time, price action is yet again making another higher high, and the RSI indicator is making yet again a lower high. So you have a triple bearish divergence on the weekly time frame. And this is an extremely bearish signal, because the indicator tells us with each and every push upwards from price action, the price action is actually getting weaker and weaker. And there's not enough strength to push up even further, you know? And we all know what happens afterwards is, well, basically turbo dumped, right? Like this was the exact top. This RSI bearish divergence on the weekly time frame basically called the top of the entire Bitcoin market cycle. And this is the power of the RSI indicator, you know. You can see how you don't even need anything else except the RSI bearish divergence on the higher time frame to be able to tell, okay, this is not bullish price action, even though the price action itself is bullish because it's trending up. You can see clear weakness in this price action thanks to the indicator. And the Woodsbot indicator makes it especially easy because we can usually you have to see the divergences on yourself. You have to identify them yourself. But on the indicator, we can see them, right? With the red lines, we can see the bearish divergence displayed on the indicator. And right now we have bullish divergence on the weekly time frame. And it also gets displayed on the Woodsbot RSI indicator. So if you are struggling to identify bearish or bullish divergence, I know some people do, you don't have to worry with the Woodsbot RSI indicator, because it already displays the RSI divergences for you. Now, you can see how powerful these RSI divergences are. This was an example for bearish divergence. But we can also find some examples for the bullish divergence, right? So if I go back in time, I don't have to look super far. And you can see it right here, right? Bitcoin made a lower low, right? But the RSI indicator is making a higher low. Again, the Woodsbot RSI indicator displays the divergence with the blue line. And you can see, even though price action is becoming more bearish, in reality, it's actually not that weak, you know? The relative strength is increasing even though price action is going lower. And again, the RSI indicator basically called the Pico perfect bottom for the Bitcoin cycle. Like, this was the fucking exact perfect Pico bottom. So even though you might not be the best trader or something, you can see how powerful these, how much higher time frame weekly RSI bullish divergences can be. Like, this is what the exact bottom was on price action, and it basically 10x from that level, right? Just by having the weekly bullish divergence. You can see how extremely strong these bullish and bearish divergences can be on the RSI indicator. And this is why a lot of people use the RSI, but I do think they use the RSI indicator not in the best way, you know, because a lot of people don't even understand divergences or use them properly, even though they are extremely simple in my opinion. And you can see, basically you just had to buy spot Bitcoin at the first possible bullish divergence, and you were extremely profitable, you know. Like, that's all it took back then. That's all it took to call the bottom and the top for Bitcoin. No additional analysis, just RSI bullish and bearish divergence on the hour time frame. Now, I want to talk about the RSI indicator and how most people use the indicator. Most people just think of RSI when it comes to the overbought and oversold area. What is the overbought and oversold area? Basically, overbought and oversold on the RSI means these two zones. So if the RSI is quote unquote overbought, it means the RSI is above this 70 mark. And the RSI is oversold if the RSI is below 30. We can see the RSI was oversold right here, and we can see the RSI was overbought right here and overbought right here, right? So this is all what overbought and oversold means. And most traders, I would say, use overbought and oversold in a signal itself for trading. They buy the asset when RSI is coming into the oversold area, and they sell, for example, Bitcoin when it comes into the overbought area. Now, I don't think that is the best way to utilize the RSI indicator, and I'm going to show you reasons why. Because in my opinion, the overbought and oversold areas are not what they seem like to be, you know. Because for me, when the RSI indicator is in the overbought area, for example, it's actually the most bullish it can be. Because you have to remember, the RSI indicator measures the relative strength, but also it measures momentum and speed. So if the RSI indicator is above 70, that's a really high percentile, right? So what it tells us is that the momentum is actually really fucking strong. The higher the RSI goes, the stronger the momentum. But people confuse that. They think the higher the RSI goes, the more bearish it becomes, but that's not true. It's quite actually the opposite. And I'm going to show you guys some examples on how what I'm telling you guys is actually not some bullshit. So, I think this was a perfect example of what I mean. Right, so you can see price action right here, right? I'm watching this price action right here. It's not super bullish, but it's not bearish as well, right? Price action is under resistance. We have resistance right here, right? Price action is under resistance and it's looking to break out. And now if we look at the RSI indicator, we can see the RSI indicator is actually getting into the overbought area. Now, people would assume okay, price action is at resistance, right? It's at these highs, it's at resistance, and it's at the overbought area, and people will short this area, right? But this is not the right approach in my opinion. Because if you actually look at it, the RSI accepted above the 70 mark, the overbought area, and it made a higher high compared to the last high on the RSI indicator. And this confirms, like, the same way it does in price action. You know, when price action is making higher highs, it's bullish. The same rule applies to the RSI. If RSI is making higher highs on the indicator, it's actually a signal to be bullish. Price action made a higher high into the overbought area. Even though it was under resistance, this is still a bullish momentum signal. But people are shorting this area because they don't understand how it properly functions. And you can see what happens afterwards, you know. RSI accepted above the overbought area, and this was the most bullish signal you can get, you know, from 13k to 64k, right? When price action was in the overbought area. Like, this is where you get the most impressive moves, is when price action is in the overbought area. So just because RSI is in the overbought zone, it doesn't mean you have to short it. I would say the higher the RSI gets, the better the momentum, you know. The first signal of weakness was not that RSI is getting into the overbought area, but again that you had a bearish divergence, right? Your price action making higher highs, but you have the RSI making lower highs. And this is your first signal to be cautious. This is your first area to be safe and to look for shorts. Because you see on the RSI indicator that it's actually becoming weaker and weaker. And then you can get strong signals. So RSI divergences in the overbought area. This is where you get the Pico perfect entries for shorts. And the same goes for the oversold area. Obviously, it's just the opposite, you know, vice versa. So I would say never blindly short the oversold area. But if you have additional confluence with an RSI divergence inside the overbought area, this is where you get the real strong short signals. But just saying, okay, the RSI is overbought, I'm gonna short, it makes no sense. Because then you're gonna get blown out of your trade, you know. On this example. You know, you have a few 100% move from the RSI getting into the overbought area. But then you had the bearish divergence right here, and this was your signal to be cautious. Not the RSI entering the overbought area, but the RSI divergence in the overbought area. So you need to have additional confluence in your overbought or oversold areas. And then you can have these massive shorts or massive longs, you know. Now, I'm gonna find you guys another example. Now we have another example here, right here. Because this was also price action. Now we have another example, because this was where the RSI went into the oversold area, right? Right here. It went into the oversold area. And naturally people think, okay, now I'm gonna buy. And long term you're not wrong to buy here, you know? But you can see this was not the... You had a bounce right afterwards, but price action still went lower, right? And it went lower a lot. It went 20% lower when for the first time when it went into the oversold area. So just because price action is coming into a oversold area doesn't mean you can just blindly long it, you know. You get a better entry if you wait for a bullish divergence in the oversold area. So the same thing that applies to the overbought area also applies to the oversold area. The lower the RSI goes, the stronger the bearish momentum gets. And you can see it here as well, right? As soon as the RSI accepted below the 50 mark, you had really strong bearish momentum and price action dumped 65% afterwards. You know, like this is really fucking bearish. This is bearish. This is what bearish momentum looks like. So I went over the overbought and oversold area. I went over the RSI divergences and the definition of RSI. What I want to talk about now is the 50 mark. The 50 mark is basically the midline from the RSI indicator. As I said in the beginning, a oscillator always oscillates between the numbers 0 and 100, and the 50 is basically the mid mark. Now what's special about the 50 mark with the RSI indicator is that it kind of acts like a support and resistance. So just when you have price action, so just like in price action when you have resistance and price action is coming into resistance and rejects from it, this is the same way the 50 mark works for the RSI. Now it's not perfect. I would say it's between 50 and 55, like this resistance and support zone for the RSI. However, you can see how as long as the RSI stayed above this 50 mark, right here, price action was bullish, right? So this whole time the RSI stayed above the 50 mark and even in the overbought area for so long, like for 500 days. And you can see how massive this pump and push was, right? Like over almost 7,000%. And the RSI never went below the 50 mark. Now it didn't bounce perfectly off it, but you can see how the RSI basically bounced off the 55 area almost every time. Again, the 50 mark is not perfect, but you know, like the mid zone around that level, and you can see how it's acting as support, but the same way it is acting as resistance. You can see right afterwards, after the RSI accepted below the 50 mark for the first time, you can see this right here, right? The RSI is accepting the first time under the 50 mark for almost 500 days. And this was a bearish signal in itself, you know, just like price action. When price action is rejecting off resistance, it's bearish. The same way applies to the RSI indicator. When the RSI indicator is accepting below the 50 mark on the higher time frame, especially, it's becoming more bearish and bearish. And we can see what happens afterwards, right? So price action in general is bearish, but also the RSI is not managing to go back above the 50 mark, and we can see price action is dumping 64% afterwards, after the RSI accepted below the 50 mark. So if you're not already in a short position, you know, and you're waiting for the RSI indicator to accept below the 50 mark, well, you had a nice entry, right? You can use the RSI retesting this 50 mark as your entry, and you can see it just basically dropped 50-60% afterwards. This is how strong the 50 mark can be. And we can see this here as well, right? We have the RSI, it reclaimed the 50 mark, but then deviated again below the 50 mark, but then it pushed back above the 50 mark again and retested the 50 mark right here. So the same way you will trade that in price action, when price action is deviating below a support and then reclaiming and retesting that support, this would be your long signal for just, if you would just watch price action. This is also your long signal when it comes to the RSI. So it deviated the 50 mark, it reclaimed and retested the 50 mark, right? And bounced off that. And this was your signal to go long on Bitcoin, just by watching the RSI indicator and the 50 mark. And you can see, I'm gonna mark it out right here, this was your retest on the 50 mark, and price action was not looking the best, you know, like it was under resistance, but you had confidence because you had bullish momentum, because the RSI accepted back above the 50 mark. And how much did it pump afterwards? 300% it pumped afterwards. So if you were not long from this bullish divergence, you can still look for entries if you trade the 50 mark on the RSI indicator. So the 50 mark acts as resistance and support, and you have to trade it like that as well. So it can be really, really useful, you know. And we can see it in the most recent price action as well, right? Price action is currently bearish and it's downtrending. And if you look at the RSI, you may, like for example, if you're looking to short the current price action, because price action is in a macro bearish trend on the higher time frame, on the weekly time frame, right? It's in a bearish up to a downtrend. So if you're looking for a short but you don't know where, you can look at the RSI, right? So price action is bouncing right here. And where do you look for shorts, right? Do you short here? Or do you short here on these lows? Where do you short, you know? And if you look at the RSI, you can see, okay, the RSI is actually retesting the 50 mark. If it accepts above the 50 mark, it's becoming bullish again, but it rejects here, right? And you can see how this 50 mark is again the Pico top of this bounce, right? And price action dumped, I think, 30% afterwards. Yeah, almost 30%. You can see how powerful the 50 mark is. So I went over the RSI divergence. I went over what the RSI even is. I went over the overbought and oversold area and the 50 mark. The last thing I want to talk about is you can actually utilize trend lines on the RSI indicator. Now, I'm not a big trend line trader. I don't really like to use trend lines because it's super subjective, in my opinion, to use trend lines. However, in my experience, they work extremely well on the RSI indicator. And I'm just going to show you guys some examples. You know, we have the top right here, you have the second top here as well. And just how you would draw a trend line on the price action, you can draw the trend line on the RSI indicator. And you can see how every time the RSI tested the trend line, price action also rejected, right? So this is the RSI trend line. And we can see price action is actually fucking rejecting right there whenever it got close to the trend line. And I think the biggest thing was the monthly trend line as well. I think that's the biggest RSI trend line you can have. Look at this monthly trend line. Look at this monthly RSI trend line. Every fucking time when Bitcoin got close to this RSI trend line, like every time, this was the macro top for the whole cycle. You can see this right here, right? Here it retested the RSI trend line. Then here again it retested the RSI trend line. And every time it was the top. This cycle it didn't even get close to the RSI trend line, to be fair. But if price action would have come close, this would also have been the macro top and would have been a short. But for this cycle, the weekly trend line was enough to call the macro top on Bitcoin, right? In prior cases, it was the monthly trend line on the RSI, but you can see how powerful these kind of trend lines are on the RSI indicator. Like, it's crazy. If price action were to come back to the RSI trend line on the monthly time frame, you can potentially short Bitcoin for a swing short, you know. So not technical analysis, but trend lines do work on the RSI indicator, same as a trend like higher highs and higher lows, same as price action. So this is all I wanted to talk about for the RSI Masterclass. You now have knowledge about RSI divergence. You now have knowledge about the overbought and oversold area, and that it actually can be quite bullish and quite bearish, and not the opposite, you know. So if you look to trade the RSI indicator in your strategy, try to look for confluences. Use the RSI divergence. Use the RSI divergence, especially in the overbought and oversold areas. This is where you get the best entries for the RSI indicator. Try to look for the 50 mark, because it acts as support and resistance. You can see it right here, right? Price RSI is accepting above the 50 mark. This is your call to long. Here price RSI is rejecting the 50 mark. This is your area for shorts. So have this knowledge, use it properly, use it to your advantage, make some money, and thanks for joining this video. Thanks for seeing it. If you guys have any further questions, reach out to me in the Discord. I've been trading RSI for 4 years now, and it's one of my favorite indicators. I think everyone should use the RSI. There's so much to talk about RSI. There's even more knowledge there's even more things to analyze on the RSI. RSI is its own chart, you know. You have Bitcoin chart, but you also have the RSI chart, and the RSI chart is a chart to analyze itself. So make sure to properly look at the RSI indicator. Make sure to utilize these RSI divergences on the Woodsbot RSI. Yeah, and thanks for joining. Thanks for looking at the video. If you guys have any questions, reach out to me. Bye bye.